Hey guys. Tonight, we wake up on scratchy straw. Your head pounding from either a druidic time warp or the worst mead hangover in recorded history. The air smells like damp wool, old onions, and something your nose can't identify, but your brain labels very suspicious. A rooster screams somewhere too close to your eardrum, and instead of your phone alarm or the gentle ping of a microwave burrito, it's a trumpet, yes. A literal horn blasting at dawn. Welcome to Camelot. You're lying on the floor of what looks like a barn, but not even the charming kind with string lights and overpriced rustic weddings. This is drafty, splintered, and packed with hay that absolutely has fleas. Your clothes are not your clothes. Korslinnen tunic. Rope, belt, and bare feet. Your TikTok hoodie gone. Your socks hilariously missed. Even your underwear situation is. Let's not talk about it. You try to stand, but the floor shifts. No, your head spins. A creaky door opens and a woman in a kerchief stomps in with a bucket and says, "Up with ye. Dungrat." The gate's already dropped. Not a morning person. Clearly. She sloshes the bucket at you, not water. You realize too late. But gray slop. Possibly porridge. Possibly punishment. Welcome breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hobble out of the barn barefoot. Half convinced this is a prank. Half convinced you died, and medieval purgatory just looks like this. Outside, it's foggy. The castle towers above you gray stone. Huge oak gates. And guards who look like extras from a theme park if they were also carrying real swords. A man in a cloak rides past on a horse that looks like it's judging you, and you're pretty sure you just locked eyes with a chicken wearing some kind of feathered cape. Again, suspicious. You wander toward the castle, rubbing your eyes. Maybe this is one of those historical reenactment villages. But no one's breaking character. You mutter, "Can I charge my phone to a passing boy?" Who promptly screams witch and bolts. That's not great. Your options are limited. Follow the flow of peasants toward the castle yard. Or wander off and risk getting eaten by something that sounds like a wild boar. Based on the growling from the tree line, you choose the crowd, which is smart, except the moment you enter the castle yard. A man yells. There she is, caught skiving off again, and suddenly you're being dragged toward a stable with zero explanation. Turns out, in this life, you're now Mira, a stable hand, with an unfortunate habit of sleepwalking during hay duty. The only evidence they have is that you appeared mysteriously, barefoot, confused, and not holding a rake. You try to explain your situation, but everything you say just confirms their belief that you've been eating too many fermented apples. You're assigned 2 chores. Immediately sweep the manure and help lift a saddle that's heavier than your dignity. Historians still argue whether Arthur's Camelot was an actual place or more of a literary invention mashed together from Celtic lore, French Romantic poetry, and a collective love for shiny tables. But wherever you are, it's real enough to give you splinters. Around midday, you're given your first meal from a wooden trough barley porridge with something green floating in it. There's no spoon. You slurp. It tastes like mossy sadness. No one else seems to mind, A nearby girl with extremely determined eyebrows whispers, "If you don't finish, the pigs get it, and then you don't get dinner. You shovel faster. Be late afternoon. You're allowed to wander near the castle," which means you get your first real look at Arthur's court. The castle is alive, with motion knights in chainmail, strutting dramatically. Kitchen servants rushing trays of suspicious meats. A nun muttering Latin and chasing a goose. The throne room is off limits. Obviously. But you catch a glimpse of gold and red through a crack in the doors. Les deux. You suspect is where Arthur actually is. You pass a tapestry that might depict the Lady of the Lake, or someone drowning in her laundry, hard to say. A monk is lecturing a group of boys about the sin of pride, while carving a piece of cheese that's literally growing hair. And someone's yelling about turnips again. You begin to accept that this might not be a dream. Your feet are too sore. The smells are too vivid. And the castle cat, who may or may not be possessed, keeps showing up wherever you are. As night falls, you're led to a tiny sleeping alcove with a burlap sack of straw and a single blanket that smells like roasted onion. You collapse onto it. Your back aches. Your hands are blistered. Your mind is spinning. You think, what if this is it? What if I'm stuck here? You don't fall asleep. You pass out. And in the dark, you hear the soft clink of armor and the sound of someone whistling Greensleeves badly off key. Welcome to Camelot. You're going to D. In about 12 ways before breakfast. Morning smacks you in the face with a cold jug of water. Literally. Someone throws it through the curtain with a cheerful, "Up now," dung face, and then scurries away giggling. You jolt upright, drenched and shivering. Your blanket's soaked. Your patience is thinner than parchment. And your left foot is now home to a very ambitious flea circus. You stumble out of your straw nook and into the stable yard again. The castle is already buzzing, blacksmiths hammering, chickens squawking in protest, servants dragging barrels that look suspiciously like they're full of pickled despair. And from the direction of the great hall wafts the tantalizing scent of, nope, false alarm. It's just hot goat fat. Your breakfast is handed to you in a wooden bowl that was probably a helmet in its past life. Incite lukewarm barley mush. Again, you mutter a quiet, deflated yay to yourself and sit on an overturned bucket. A boy next to you grins, toothless, and offers you a beetle. You politely decline. That's when a broad-shouldered woman with arms like a trebuchet and a braid that could strangle a horse points at you and says, "You, bread duty." You're marched to the castle kitchen, which is less Downton Abbey and more Hell's Cauldron. It's humid, packed with shouting servants. And the only recipe anyone follows is cook until angry. You're assigned to knead dough. The flour is coarse, the yeast questionable, and the dough fights back. It sticks to your elbows, your eyebrows, and at one point, you're pretty sure it flips you off. But after 2 hours and several threats from the head cook, whose name, alarmingly, is Widow Sarn, you help crank out a dozen loaves of something that vaguely resembles bread. A bell rings outside. You follow the crowd like a confused duck and arrive at a sort of courtyard/gathering place. There's a long plank table, no chairs. A man in a threadbare cloak announces, "By decree of His Majesty, today's share is modest," which you soon realize is medieval code for "you'll be lucky to lick the plate." Each person gets a hunk of stale bread, a smear of something brown and salty, don't ask, and a lukewarm turnip. You chew slowly, trying to pretend it's avocado toast. It is not. Historians still argue whether the real people of Arthurian times lived like this, or if the legends glossed over the 97% of life that involved mud, yelling, and turnips. Based on your current experience, the latter seems more than likely. As you gnaw the bread, you listen, because the people around you are gossiping. One says a knight lost a duel by tripping over his own scabbard. Another claims the queen sneezed into her goblet, and the king drank it anyway. But the most interesting tidbit comes from a boy sweeping near your feet. There's a feast tonight. The round table will be there. Even Merlin. They say. You perk up. A feast. A chance to sneak into Arthur's court. After the midday chores, which include scrubbing pots with dried moss and carrying water up stone stairs, and steep enough to count as a cardio death sentence, you make a plan. You need to get closer to the nobles, or at least into the feast hall. And for that, you need leverage. You need someone who knows someone. Enter Tobin the stable rat. Tobin isn't actually a rat, just a very small, very dirty child who seems to be everywhere at once and always knows what's happening. You find him hiding in a pile of hay, eating something unidentifiable. I need to get into the feast. You whisper. He cues. You got 3 goose feathers. Half a candle. Or a secret. I have a weird birthmark shaped like a banana. He narrows his eyes. Fine. You can ride in with the cheese cart. And so, at dusk, you wedge yourself behind wheels of hard cheese and hope you don't suffocate under Gouda. The cart rumbles through a side gate, past grumbling guards, and into the lower kitchens of the great hall. It's chaos. Boars on spits, trays of roasted roots, jugs of wine. You smell cloves, honey, and maybe, just maybe, cinnamon. Nobles are already trickling into the candlelit hall. You catch glimpses of velvet cloaks, silver goblets, and the unmistakable booming laugh of someone very important and very drunk. The round table is partially visible. It's not entirely round, more like awkwardly circular, with a chunk bitten out of one edge where someone likely threw a chair. Knights thump their goblets. A woman plays a lute and sings a ballad about a goose that betrayed its lover. You hide behind a barrel, watching wide-eyed. And then you spot him. King Arthur. Holden cloak. Crown. That looks surprisingly modest. Laugh lines. And beside him, Queen Guinevere. Radiant and distant. Sipping wine like it's a weapon. No one notices you. Until someone does. A young man with a face too pretty for his own good and a smirk that's practically illegal leans toward you from behind a pillar and whispers, "You're not supposed to be here." You freeze. He hands you a plum. "Don't worry," he says, biting his own. "I won't tell, but I hope you like dancing, because after dinner, it gets truly ridiculous." You have no idea what's coming, but somehow, you know this is only the beginning of the madness. You don't know his name, but you remember his eyes like polished amber, full of mischief and moonlight. He disappears into the banquet as easily as he appeared, leaving you holding a slightly bruised plum and a very pressing question. Do you stay hidden and hope the cheese doesn't betray you with its increasingly pungent odor? Or do you risk stepping out and pretending to belong? You decide, against every sensible fiber in your aching feet. To risk it, you slip from behind the barrel and straighten your posture in what you think is a noble sort of way. though it probably looks more like you're recovering from a goat kick. You nod at a passing servant, who nods back, possibly assuming you're just another kitchen rat with delusions of grandeur. You snag a tray of bread as camouflage and drift slowly into the current of the feast. The great hall is warm, with firelight and raucous laughter. Trays of roasted meats float by like edible parade floats. Nobles recline on benches, too fancy for their backs, while hounds circle beneath them like hopeful vultures. You spot a minstrel with half a harp and a goblet of something that's probably wine, but smells like melted beeswax. Someone slaps your back and shouts, "Ah, new blood in the kitchens." Hey, don't let Widow Sarn bite your fingers off. You grin weakly and shuffle on. Historians still argue whether Camelot was a centralized court or a loose confederation of tribal chiefs under a shared banner. But the sense of order here is, well, creative. Protocol seems based less on birthright and more on who can yell loudest or carry the most meat at once. You pass a side table where knights clearly off duty are arm wrestling with mugs between their teeth. One wears his helmet backwards and keeps muttering, "Best 2 out of 3. Sir Elbow." Suddenly, a hush falls over the hall. You freeze mid-bread delivery. A figure enters through the main arch, tall, silver-haired, and wearing a robe that's clearly seen some suspicious things. A staff clinks against the stone. A hawk perches on his shoulder, and his beard is at least 3 policy scrolls long. Merlin. He doesn't walk so much as glide in slow irritation. His expression suggests he's already disappointed with everyone, and possibly you specifically. He mutters something, sneezes into his sleeve, and proceeds to set the hawk on the table, where it immediately poops on a platter of candied apples. Merlin takes the seat next to Arthur without fanfare. Arthur just laughs, claps him on the shoulder, and pours him something dark and steaming. You don't hear the words, but the glance they share is that of old friends who've survived far too many curses together. "Bring forth the puddings," someone bellows. The feasting resumes. You linger by a pillar, nibbling your stolen plum. Sweet, juicy, maybe slightly magical. That, or your taste buds are so starved for sugar, they've declared martial law. Then the music begins. A reedy flute, a lute with 2 missing strings, a shaky tambourine. It's not exactly Coachella, but the hall comes alive. Night starts spinning. Squires stomp, and one elderly lady in a velvet hat does a move that might be illegal in 3 counties. Before you can retreat, someone grabs your hand. It's Amber Eyes. "Dance with me." He grins. You try to protest something about being from the future, and also lacking basic coordination, but he whirls you into the chaos before you can say, "Ye old help." You spin between knights and ladies, crash into a roast goose, and trip over a dog. But somehow, you're laughing. So is he. The music speeds up, and for a moment, you forget the aching feet, the itchy tunic, and the fact that your deodorant wore off 2 days ago. You're not from here. He whispers between steps. You blink. What makes you say that? You smell like soap, and you look everyone in the eyes. You glance down, suddenly self-conscious. That's not allowed. He shrugs. Here. It's bold, dangerous, kind of stupid. Perfect. You mutter. The dance ends in a swirl of skirts, laughter, and someone falling into a wine barrel. You don't ask who. You're still trying to breathe. You never told me your name. You pant. I never will, he says, then vanishes into the crowd like a Disney prince with abandonment issues. You stagger back toward the pillar and wipe your brow. That's when you feel it a tug at your sleeve. A child with a smudge of honey on his face is staring at you. The queen wants to see you, he says solemnly. Oh no, you're marched well. Gently herded toward the throne. Guinevere looks even more radiant up close. Her gown glitters like frost. Her hair is coiled like judgment. She peers down at you with a small smile and says, you dance with enthusiasm and courage. You bow, or maybe just fold in half like a nervous omelet. Arthur leans over. Amused. What's your name? Girl, you consider your options. Mira. Your Majesty. Guinevere raises one eyebrow. The stable hand. You nod. Arthur laughs. Well, Mira the stable dancer. You've earned a seat among the servers tonight. You've lifted the spirits of this grim hall. You nod again. Afraid if you open your mouth, turnip will come out. See that she eats something proper. Guinevere says. A platter appears. Meat. Real meat. Glazed carrots. Honeyed bread. Even a fig. Your eyes sting a little. You take your place among the servers. You eat slowly. Reverently. Like someone who's seen the worst porridge of her life and lived to tell the tale. You glance around the hall. Arthur is laughing with a knight who looks like he sleeps with a sword. Merlin is arguing with the hawk. The queen is sipping from a goblet, with eyes half-lidded, as if dreaming of someplace far away. And you're just trying to digest without exploding. You've survived your second day. Barely. The sun rises far too early in Camelot. No snooze button. No blackout curtains. Just a rooster with vocal ambitions and a sky turning gold, whether you like it or not. Your back protests every movement as you sit up in your straw-stuffed sleeping alcove. The fine meal from the feast sits heavy in your belly. But it's the memory of last night's dance and the queen's curious gaze that really lingers. You toss your tattered blanket aside and tiptoe through the servants' quarters. Around you, others groan, stretch, or snore. One girl whispers a morning prayer to a saint you've never heard of. Saint? Bleam of the unmuddied spoon. Maybe. You're not sure. But you're certain she's doing better than you. Outside, the castle is already alive. Carts roll in through the gates, bringing sacks of flour and barrels of pickled something. A knight is yelling at a groom for brushing his horse with insufficient reverence. The smell of smoke, sweat, and yeast hangs thick in the air. You're not entirely sure what your duties are today, which is a risky thing in a place where loitering can be interpreted as inviting a whipping. So you grab the nearest broom and begin sweeping the corridor outside the kitchen like you belong there. This is a classic move: pretend to be busy, and people assume you're exactly where you're supposed to be. A few minutes in, a familiar shape approaches Tobin the stable rat, grinning like he's eaten something valuable and morally questionable. You danced with the queen watching. He hisses like it's a felony. Half the castle thinks you're bewitched. You groan. I just danced. Exactly. He nods. Normal people don't do that. He eyes you sideways. Word is, you might get promoted. To what? He shrugs. Something closer to the royal types. Food taster. Message runner. Groomer of the queen's hawk. Her hawk. He nods solemnly. Very picky feathers. You're skeptical. But as you sweep, a page boy runs up. eyes wide and hair askew. You're Mira. Right. Her Grace wants you in the south courtyard. You look down at your dusty tunic. Now, now, now. You drop the broom and follow. The south courtyard is quieter. Ivy creeps up the stone walls, and a gentle fountain burbles in the center. A few women in gowns walk arm in arm, giggling behind fans. You spot Guinevere under an arbor of blooming vines, surrounded by handmaidens, with a small embroidery hoop in her lap. You bow low. She motions you forward without looking up. Do you sew? You pose. Yes. Poorly. She chuckles. Perfect. You'll fit right in. And, just like that, you're handed a basket of tangled threads and a square of linen, with what appears to be a half-finished unicorn being trampled by a goose. One of the ladies pats the bench beside her. Sit. Just make sure it looks intentional. You do your best. Stabbing the cloth, like it insulted your family. To your surprise, no one corrects you. They chat as they work. About court rumors. Knights with excellent calves, and which goose in the garden has been stealing jewelry. You nod along, pretending to understand references like Sir Ewan's very tragic eel incident. One girl leans in. You're the dancer. Right. You sigh. That's me. She noticed you. She, Lady Morgaine. You blink. The name echoes with the weight of 100 legends. Morgaine. Morgan Le Fay. The sorceress. Enchantress. Maybe Arthur's sister. Maybe not mystery wrapped in velvet and secrets. Historians still argue whether she was purely villainous, a misunderstood genius, or just incredibly allergic to patience. She asked about you. The girl continues. Said you didn't look afraid. You didn't feel brave at the time. More like dizzy. Your needle slips and stabs your finger. You wince but say nothing. Blood blooms on the linen right on the goose's wing. You casually pretend it's decorative. Later, you're dismissed with a small nod. As you stand, Guinevere's eyes meet yours. Come back tomorrow, she says softly. You nod and back away. Somehow, bowing and tripping over your own feet at the same time. As you leave the courtyard, you catch sight of a figure watching from the corridor, a woman in midnight blue. Hair like ink. Eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Morgaine. She tilts her head and smiles. You return to the stables shaken. That night, you dream of geese, wearing crowns and needles sewing by themselves. The next day, you're summoned again, but not to the courtyard, to the West Tower, and the guards don't look amused. You climb the spiraling steps of the West Tower, with your heart performing a full percussion solo against your ribs. Each stone stair groans beneath your feet, as though resenting your very presence. The torches flicker ominously on the damp walls, casting long shadows that sway like silent witnesses. You're not sure what's worse, the silence of the guards who escorted you this far, or the whispery creak of old stone stretching beneath centuries of secrets. At the top of the stairs waits a chamber, partially open. Its iron-bound door carved with strange runes, probably decorative, hopefully not cursed. You inhale deeply, then step inside. It smells of herbs and wax, and something a little too sweet to be comfortable. The chamber is cluttered, but organized scrolls stacked like towers. Bowls filled with powders and shades you didn't know existed. And at the center, a desk littered with vials, crystals, and an upturned hourglass. Morgane is waiting. She doesn't rise when you enter. She merely gestures to a stool across from her with 2 fingers. Sit. You sit. Instantly, she eyes you like a puzzle with missing corners. You're not afraid of me. You swallow. I haven't decided yet. She almost smiles. Almost. She gestures at a covered tray on the table. What do you see? You lift the cloth and reveal 3 apples. Perfect. Glossy. Suspiciously identical. Pick the real one, she says. You stare. They all look like they belong in a fairy tale where someone definitely gets poisoned. Still, you point at the one slightly less symmetrical than the others. She nods. Interesting. Before you can ask what that means, she pulls a vial from the chaos of her desk and holds it up to the light. This is mandrake essence, useful for dreams and enemies. I'm working on a new formula. I need someone expendable. Is that me? For now, she says. Don't look so grim. You're not being fed to a dragon. Yet. She chuckles softly, then gestures toward a stack of books taller than your torso. Help me sort these. By scent. You blink. Pardon. They're infused with dried herbs. One by one. Sniff and sort. Lavender with lavender. Wormwood with wormwood. Don't mix them up. Unless you'd like to sneeze yourself into another dimension. Thus begins what might be the strangest part of your journey so far. Medieval scent-based library organization. You inhale pages until your nostrils feel like they've been pickled in camphor. You sneeze. Cough. And once, accidentally identify a book as oregano when it was clearly old boot. Still, Morgane seems satisfied, or at least, amused. Between sneezes, she quizzes you. Do you believe magic is real? You shrug. If it gets me out of doing laundry, I'm willing to believe in anything. She grins at that. Wise answer. She tells you stories half fable, half warning. Of knights, cursed for arrogance. Of maidens who turned into swans. Of kings who lost entire weeks to enchanted sleep. She speaks like someone who's lived these tales. Not merely read them. Historians still argue whether Morgane was truly a sorceress or simply a skilled herbalist with a knack for theater. But as you sit in her tower, surrounded by jars labeled Viper's Kiss and Dragon's Sigh, the distinction feels irrelevant. At dusk, she offers you a small token, a pendant shaped like a fox's head. For cunning, she says, and survival. You take it, not entirely sure whether it's protective or tracking related. Either way, you feel safer with it on. She finally waves you away with a dismissive flick. Go, before the court assumes I've turned you into a frog. You descend the tower with legs like pudding and a nose still tingling from rosemary overload. Outside, the courtyard has shifted into its evening rhythm cooks, scrubbing pans, guards changing shifts, and somewhere, a minstrel singing a love ballad to a chicken. Don't ask. Tobin finds you near the well, eyes wide. You met her, and you're still alive. That's basically sainthood. You hand him a leftover sprig of something minty from Morgane's tower. Here. Now, you've met her too. He runs off screaming, probably to sell it for a turnip. That night, you're given a slightly better blanket in the servants' quarters. No one says anything, but there's a subtle shift in the way they glance at you. Some with curiosity, some with caution. You dream of foxes, staircases, and apples that bite back. Morning comes with rain, a soft drizzle that turns the castle into a wet puzzle of slick stone and dripping archways. You're summoned again, not by Morgane this time, but by one of Guinevere's handmaidens. Her Majesty requests your presence. Bring your sewing fingers. You follow, cloak damp, boots squelching. In the Queen's solar, Guinevere is working on a tapestry. This one shows a battle knights charging beneath a sky stitched in shades of blood and gold. Take this corner, she says. You sit. Your stitches are still chaotic. But she doesn't seem to mind. Tell me, she asks after a long silence. What did Morgane want with you? You hesitate. A test. And herbs. And foxes. Guinevere's lips twitch. She likes foxes. You glance at the tapestry. Is this a real battle? She doesn't answer for a while. Then says softly, one that hasn't happened yet. You don't know what to say to that. So you sew. Sloppily, but with effort. As you leave the room, she adds, keep the pendant visible. Some people will think twice before bothering you. You nod. You're starting to realize that survival here isn't just about food and blankets. It's about alliances, symbols, the stories people choose to believe about you. And right now, they're starting to believe you might be something more than just another servant. The pendant swings lightly against your chest as you pass through the castle corridors. Its weight, far more symbolic than physical. You catch the glances, it draws quick flickers of curiosity, confusion, and in one case, outright fear from a kitchen boy who promptly dropped a jug of cider and muttered an apology to a floorboard. You tuck it halfway under your tunic, letting just the fox's ears peek out. Subtle threat. Fox mode activated. Rain still patters softly across the courtyard tiles. You're sent to help in the scriptorium, which sounds impressive until you realize it's just a fancy word for where monks ruin their eyes writing Latin. The place smells of ink, dust, and desperation. A thin, nervous man with a beard that belongs in a fairy tale waves you over and thrusts a stack of parchments into your arms. These go to the Western Archive. Careful. With that top one, it's got a smear of real lapis. You stare at the smear. It looks like toothpaste from a very fashionable bird. The archive is 3 halls away, tucked beside the chapel. You push open the creaky door and immediately sneeze. Someone here clearly believes in aromatic mildew. Rows of scrolls and books line the walls like sleepy soldiers. You start shelving. Carefully. Scroll after scroll. Text after text. Some in Latin. Some in Welsh. One apparently written by someone mid-drunken rant. You resist the urge to annotate it. Midway through, you find a hidden nook, a narrow alcove behind a threadbare curtain. Inside, a collection of less official-looking items. A charcoal sketch of a woman with wild hair. A rusted dagger wrapped in cloth. A small clay vial marked with a symbol resembling a snake devouring its own tail. You stare at it for a long moment before replacing it carefully. This isn't just an archive. It's someone's secret. Historians still argue whether King Arthur's court tolerated sorcery in quiet corners or merely turned a blind eye to what couldn't be proven. But here, you can feel it. The line between wisdom and witchcraft is very, very blurry. You return to the scriptorium with empty arms and too many questions. But you're quickly pulled into a new task, this one, involving quills, ink, and illuminating a page with gold leaf, which, spoiler alert, is way harder than it looks. The moment you touch brush to parchment, you smear it like a toddler with jam. The monk sighs and hands you a blank sheet instead. Practice. A lot. So now you're practicing medieval calligraphy. Your fingers cramp. Your back protests. The ink stains your nails blue and your sleeve brown. But the rhythm, oddly, soothes you. Stroke. Pause. Breath. You fall into it like a trance, until you ruin the capital Q again and curse under your breath. Language. The monk hisses. Sorry. Do you whisper? Quills are cruel. That night, instead of the servants' quarters, you're quietly handed a key and shown to a tiny alcove above the kitchen. Private. Damp. But yours? There's even a window with a sliver of moonlight. Tobin finds you as you're settling in. He eyes the pendant. So, are you part witch now? You shrug. Unofficially. He sits cross-legged on your floor and hands you a shriveled apple. Heard a rumor. Of course you did. Arthur's knights. They're not all from noble families. Some were chosen. Raised up. You pose. Raised how? Like you. Plucked from mud and handed a sword. You glance at your broom, which is about as sword-like as a carrot. I don't think I'm quite there yet. He shrugs. Maybe not. But you've got the look. You arch a brow. What look? The kind people don't know what to do with. You toss the apple at him. He fumbles it and mutters something about being underfed and overwise. The next morning, your promotion continues. You're summoned to the inner court kitchens, where food is prepared for royalty only. No scraps. No spoiled beets. Just real butter. Imported spices. And bread that doesn't double as a weapon. The cook, Mistress Tala, is terrifying. Her arms are thicker than some tree trunks, and her voice could peel paint. She hands you a basket of greens and a knife, and tells you to chop until your sins are forgiven. You don't ask questions. Hours pass in a blur of steam, clanging pots, and terrifying pastry debates. You learn quickly never question Tala's garlic ratios. Never touch her spoons. And definitely don't sneeze near the pheasants. At one point, a knight strides in and demands a snack befitting valor. Tala hands him a raw onion and slams the door in his face. You fall in love instantly. Later, as you scrub pans, in a quiet voice beside you, says, "You're Mira." You turn. It's him again. Amber eyes. He leans on the counter like he belongs there. Like he hasn't vanished into thin air the last 3 times. You saw him. You keep showing up. You mutter. So do you. He replies. The castle's talking about you. Let me guess. Witch. Thief. Cabbage. He grins. Potential. You roll your eyes. Great. I always wanted to be vague and ominous. He nods at the pendant. You wear it well. You seem to know a lot. I pay attention. It's safer that way. You narrow your eyes. Are you a knight, a spy, a figment of my overstimulated brain? None of the above, and a little of all 3. Before you can question further, Mistress Tala returns and nearly brains him with a ladle. He vanishes again, like fog off hot bread. That night, as you sit in your window nook, combing flour from your hair, you realize something unsettling. You're starting to belong here. The next morning greets you not with the comforting scent of baking bread, but with a scroll jammed under your door. It's sealed with wax, bearing the image of a fox, Morgaine's mark. You crack it open, half expecting to be summoned, to drink more mystery potions, or categorize toad breath by viscosity. But no, it's something worse. She wants you to attend a training session in the Eastern Field. Dress for movement. The note says, vague and terrifying. You stumble into your tunic and boots, scarf down a heel of bread, and head out. The Eastern Field lies just beyond the orchard, where rows of apple trees line up like gossiping grandmothers. The grass is slick with dew, the sky cloud-heavy. A handful of others are already there, boys mostly. A few girls, all holding wooden practice swords. Some look eager. Others look like they made poor life decisions. Morgaine isn't there, but the man overseeing the field might be worse. He's broad, scarred, wearing a tunic that looks like it survived several plagues and a helmet dented in at least 3 places. His voice sounds like gravel and regret. You lot, he growls, are here because someone important thinks you're not completely useless. I'm here to prove them wrong. He tosses you a wooden sword. You catch it poorly and immediately drop it. So far, so good. Training begins. You're drilled in posture, balance, grip. Turns out, you've been holding brooms all wrong your whole life. The wooden sword bites your palms. Your arms ache. Your thighs protest. At one point, you accidentally smack your own shin and invent a new dance move on the spot. It does not impress anyone. Still, you persist. You're not the fastest or strongest, but you are stubborn and weirdly coordinated once your brain gives up and your body takes over. After several drills, the instructor narrows his eyes at you and grunts something almost complimentary. You don't flinch. You take that as a win. The next few mornings repeat the pattern. Kitchen chores, secret duels with onions, afternoon sword drills. The bruises multiply. So do the whispers. Some servants start calling you the foxling. Others keep their distance. One afternoon, you find yourself summoned again, this time to the royal stables. Apparently, Guinevere wants a hawk retrieved. Tobin meets you by the paddocks with a look that says, this is a terrible idea, but also let's do it. You both head into the falconer's tower, a cylindrical nightmare of screeching birds, feathers, and men who speak in clicks. You're handed a leather glove, pointed toward a perch, and given very vague instructions. Somehow, you manage not to lose an eye. The hawk named Whisper, because irony is eventually coaxed onto your arm. She's heavier than expected, glaring at you with yellow eyes full of judgment. You march her back to the queen like a child delivering a temperamental relative. Guinevere accepts her without comment, but raises an eyebrow at the scratches on your forearm. She chose you, she murmurs, or is planning to kill me slowly. You mutter. Whisper ruffles her feathers in agreement. That evening, while washing the dust from your hair, you overhear 2 maids whispering in the corridor. They're talking about Camelot's court magician. Not Morgaine, someone else. A man rarely seen. Said, to live beyond the gardens, in a tower that disappears in fog. Some say he was once a king himself. Others claim he sleeps inside a tree and wakes only during eclipses. Historians still argue whether Merlin was a real person, an amalgam of druids, or a metaphor for lost wisdom. But in Camelot, His name is spoken with reverence and fear. You find yourself drawn to the gardens that night. The moon is fat and low. The air smells of mint and stone. You wander through hedges and vines until you stumble upon a path you've never seen twisting between twisted oaks and silent statues. At the end is a gate. Beyond it, mist. And then, a figure, tall, cloaked, leaning on a staff. "Lost?" he asks. Voice like wind across water. "Curious." You reply. He tilts his head. "That's worse." You squint at him. "Are you Merlin?" He shrugs. "Depends who's asking. And what they believe." Not helpful. He gestures to a bench. You sit. He speaks without moving his mouth. Or maybe you imagine that. It's hard to tell in the mist. You're tangled in something big. He says, threads pulling tight. "Is that a prophecy?" He smiles. "Just an observation." You glance at his staff. It's carved with sigils that make your head hurt. "I didn't ask to be tangled." No one does. He stands. Cloak, shifting, like smoke. Don't trust what shines too brightly. Fire draws moths and burns them. And just like that, it disappears. You sit there for a while, feeling like your brain's been shaken, like a snow globe. Back in your room, you find a small scroll tucked under your pillow. "No seal." Just a single sentence. "You're being watched. Be clever." You look out your window. Nothing but fog, but you leave the pendant on, just in case. By dawn, your dreams have melted into a slurry of hawks, mists, and sentences that refuse to finish. You wake groggy, your body aching in at least 5 new places. The scroll from last night still sits where you left it, innocuous as lint, and yet it hums in your thoughts like a wasp behind glass. You read it again. "You're being watched. Be clever." What a delightful morning affirmation. You fold it up, tuck it into your boot, and try to pretend you're not slightly paranoid. The kitchens offer no solace. Mistress Tala shoves a pan into your hands and informs you that today is eel pie day, which sounds like a threat. Tobin is already elbow-deep in fish guts and greets you with a grin that implies this is somehow your fault. Apparently, the eels fought back. He says, nodding at a slash on his sleeve. "Good. I hope they unionize." You slice, mix, season. The day slips by in a haze of flour and shouted orders. By now, you know the rhythms how to dodge a flying ladle, when to stir and when to flee, and which cupboard door sticks if you don't kick it first. It's strange, but comforting. You almost forget you might be in the middle of some legendary cosmic chess match. Almost. In the afternoon, you're summoned again. But this time, not to Guinevere or Morgaine. This time it's Arthur himself. The summons is delivered by a knight whose face is all jawline and brooding. He doesn't say much, just nods, Historis, and marches you toward the heart of the castle, through guarded doors and past silent stone statues that definitely weren't there last week. The hall is enormous. Light spills through colored windows, bathing everything in jewel tones. Arthur stands at the far end, not on a throne, but beside a long, circular table. It's real, and much less polished than the legends would suggest. A scratch here, a chipped edge there. It's a table meant for warriors, not poets. Estudies you, not unkindly, but like someone trying to guess what card you're hiding in your sleeve. You're Mira. You nod. I've heard Odd things. I get that a lot. A corner of his mouth lifts. You've trained with my soldiers. You've worked in my kitchens. And Morgane gave you her mark. You touched the pendant reflexively. You've been near power, he says. And survived. Was that a test? He shrugs. Everything is. You wait. Unsure if this is the part where you're knighted or thrown into a pit. I want your eyes. He says at last. Pardon. Eyes see things. Knights miss. Nobles miss. Even queens miss. I want someone who walks halls and fields and hears what isn't said. Someone unremarkable enough to be invisible. Until they aren't. You blink. Are you asking me to spy? I'm asking you to see, which is not a denial. You consider it. Say nothing. But your silence is apparently answer enough. He nods. Then gestures to the door. You'll be sent with Sir Bedivere to the village at dawn. There's unrest. People whisper of visions and strange lights. I want to know if it's rot or weather. Either way, find the source. He turns back to the table. And just like that, the audience is over. You're handed a satchel, a letter of passage, and a sour-looking travel companion named Bedivere, who seems deeply displeased that his noble duties now involve babysitting a kitchen rat with opinions. I've also got elbows. You reply. Use them wisely. You ride out at dawn. Horses crunching frost from the grass. The world outside the castle is wider than you remembered. Colder. More unpredictable. You pass stone cottages. Fields dotted with goats. And a mill where a dog barks at nothing in particular for a solid 15 minutes. The village is small, but tense. People speak in hushed tones. Doors stay shut. Children don't run, they slink. At the inn, the barkeep eyes your pendant and mutters something about foxes bringing storms. You respond by ordering a bowl of stew and pretending not to hear him. That evening, a woman slips into your room, uninvited. She's wearing a shawl stitched with crescent moons and smells like burnt sage and candle wax. I saw you in a dream, she says without preamble. That's concerning. You stood on a bridge made of bones, but you didn't fall. Nice. You were followed by birds with knives for wings. Less nice. She leans in. Be careful who stands behind you. Then she leaves. No name. No explanation. Just a room that suddenly feels colder. You sleep lightly. One hand near your boot knife and one eye half open. Whisper the hawk isn't here. But you dream of feathers, of wind, of blood on stone. Again, in the morning, Bedivere tells you a shepherd found something in the woods. You'll want to see it. He grumbles. The something turns out to be a circle of mushrooms growing in perfect symmetry. In the center, a stone carved with a spiral that pulses faintly in the mist. Bedivere refuses to step inside it. You do. Naturally. Because you have very little self-preservation and a lot of curiosity inside the ring. Everything is quieter. Sharper. The air hums. You touch the stone, and a memory not your own flashes behind your eyes. Fire. Screaming. Antlers. A girl with silver eyes whispering in a tongue you don't know but somehow understand. You stagger back. Heart racing. Bedivere looks pale. What did you see? Something old. Back in the village. People gather around you like you're made of stories. They ask questions you can't answer. They offer gifts you can't accept. A woman presses a bundle of dried lavender into your hands and whispers, "They'll follow you now, whether you want them or not." You leave before sunset. As you ride, Bedivere finally breaks the silence. "You were different before you touched the stone." "You think so?" "You stopped humming to the horse." "I was humming." "Yes. It was annoying. But I miss it." You laugh, the sound catching like smoke in your throat. Camelot rises on the horizon. Golden and unreal, you return changed, and the castle feels it. When you cross back through Camelot's gates, something is off. The guards give you sharper looks, like your face is no longer quite where they left it. Servants whisper as you pass. The hawk on the parapet shrieks when you look up, then goes silent. You smell smoke, though nothing burns. You report to Arthur immediately. Bedivere does most of the talking, reciting your findings with the grim thoroughness of a man who would rather be jousting a fence post. When he gets to the mushroom ring, "He hesitates." You don't. "I touched the stone," you say. Arthur stiffens. Behind him, Morgane, who has materialized like a ghost with better hair, tilts her head. "You weren't supposed to do that." "Great. Add that to my growing list of infractions." "You saw something," she says. You nod. "Fire. Antlers. A girl." Morgane and Arthur exchange a look. It's the kind of look that means we'll talk about this, where the kitchen girl can't hear. "Too bad. You're very good at hearing things you shouldn't." Later that evening, you're walking the garden wall when Tobin finds you. He's holding a bruised pear and an expression that suggests he might have just run from someone yelling, "Get back here with that." You look haunted. He says, "Thanks. It's the glowing rock trauma." He sits beside you, chews loudly, and adds, "People say you're cursed now," which is honestly an upgrade from useless apprentice and a percent. I've been both in the same week. Tobin nudges your arm. "You know you're one of them now." "Right. One of who?" He waves vaguely. "The ones who matter." You glance up at the towers, the stars, the weight pressing in around you. It doesn't feel like it. That's because they're not clapping and giving you a crown. They're watching to see if you'll trip. You look down. The ground is far away. Over the next few days, your assignments change. Favor kitchen shifts. More shadowing, more gain. You find yourself helping her mix tinctures, map star positions, and decipher texts that look like someone tried to write a cookbook while having a seizure. You sort herbs. You test salves. You learn that one root can cure fevers and, in double the dose, stop a heart. Fun. One morning she hands you a scroll sealed in blue wax. "Deliver this to the Library of Iron." You blink. "That's not a place." "It is," she replies, "but only if you don't try too hard to find it." That is the least helpful set of instructions anyone has ever given you. You wander the lower levels of Camelot, through tunnels that smell of mildew and old dreams. Finally, behind a door disguised as a wine rack, you find it. A narrow corridor lined with tomes, chained to iron rails. The temperature drops. Candles burn with blue flame. A woman in a veil appears from nowhere, takes the scroll, and asks you to place your hand on a stone slab. You hesitate. But you've touched worse. The stone is cold and humming. You feel a pulse not yours. Something that tastes like thunder behind your eyes. You may return. The veiled woman says, and vanishes. You walk out with knees that feel like pudding. That night, a letter appears on your pillow. No name, just a sigil, a spiral, pierced by a thorn. It says only, "Soon. Be ready." You crumple it up, then smooth it out again, and hide it. The next morning, Guinevere calls for you. You expect hawk retrieval, maybe another passive-aggressive tea tasting. Instead, she leads you to her solar and locks the door. "I've seen the records," she says without greeting. "Which ones?" "The ones that don't exist anymore." "Ah." She sits across from you, lasso gloves tight against her fingers. You've touched something old, and not all of it wants to stay asleep. You frown. "You think something followed me. I think something woke up when you arrived. And now it's watching. You've had better breakfasts." She hands you a parcel wrapped in silk. "Wear this at the equinox." You peek inside. It's a cloak the color of storm clouds, embroidered with silver threads in the shape of constellations you don't recognize. "It's not magical," she says, "but it might make them pause." "Who's them?" "The ones who remember." Before you can ask anything else, she rings a bell and sends you away. Outside her chambers, Tobin is waiting with 2 cloaks and a face full of mischief. "Field trip," he says. "We've got to ride out to retrieve a relic." You blink. "Since when do I retrieve relics?" "Since Arthur trusts you more than most of his cousins." You sigh. "Where are we going?" "To a ruin," he says, "that may or may not still be cursed." Of course it is. The road is long. The horse is grumpy, and the rain steady. The ruin is half a tower, clinging to a hill like a broken tooth. Inside, it smells of moss and regret. You find the relic, a small bronze disc etched with stars and dragons, nestled in an alcove behind a loose stone. The moment you touch it, the air thickens. Voices rise not from your throat, not from Tobin's but from the stone itself, chanting, a single phrase repeated in a tongue you don't know but feel vibrating in your bones. You drop it. Tobin catches it. "We're bringing this back," he asks. You nod slowly. "With gloves." When you return, Arthur is waiting. He examines the relic, nods, and says, "The threads are converging." You say nothing. What does one say to a king preparing for battle against time? That night, if you dream again, this time the girl with silver eyes speaks. "Soon," she says, "the gate will open. Choose well." You wake with a start, and the sky outside is bleeding red. The red sky doesn't fade with morning. It lingers like a stain. Birds fly low. Dogs bark at nothing. You pass a mirror and swear your reflection moves half a second too late. Something has shifted, and everyone feels it, even the ones pretending not to. Morgane summons you before breakfast. She's burning incense that smells like lemon and bones. "Sit," she says, pointing to a circle of chalk etched into the floor. You sit. "Obviously, close your eyes." You do. A wind that doesn't belong to the room brushes your cheek. Something whispers in your ear, not in words, but in sensation. Wet stone. Ash. A heartbeat underground. When you open your eyes, the chalk is gone. So is Morgane. Only her pendant remains, left on the cushion beside you. You reach for it. It's warm. Later, Arthur calls a council. You're not supposed to be there. But Guinevere beckons you into a side chamber. a hidden corridor with a view through the latticework. You see knights, Lancelot, Gawain, Bedivere arguing. A map spreads across the table, riddled with sigils and stones. At the center is a spiral drawn in blood-red ink. They're rising again. Arthur says, voice low, "We don't know that." Lancelot replies, "Then, what woke the stones? What walks our dreams?" Historians still argue whether Arthur's enemies were literal men or something more mythic, fey creatures. Forgotten gods. Personified fears. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. Whispering from shadows, Guinevere whispers in your ear, "You'll go to the Standing Stones tomorrow." You turn. Startled. Alone. With the hawk. Helpful. The next day, you're packed a satchel with dried meat, a flask of herbs, and a blade, curved like a question. Whisper flutters down from the eaves and lands on your shoulder like she owns you. You ride out at dawn. On the red sky, now a dull bruise, the Standing Stones loom in the distance, ancient and tilted like old teeth. When you reach them, the world quiets. No birds, no wind, just the thrum of something beneath the soil. You step into the circle. Everything changes. Colors dim. Sound warps. Time twists like wet linen. You move between the stones and feel watched. Not malevolently, more like the way a lion watches a squirrel, curious. Mildly amused. Potentially hungry. In the center lies a basin. Dry, but you pour water from your flask into it anyway. The surface shivers. Then shows a vision. You see yourself, not now, but possible, wearing armor, or robes, or nothing but antlers and gold. Each version ends the same, standing before a gate of light. You stagger back. Whisper shrieks and lifts off. Circling high, the vision fades. But the feeling doesn't. You ride home slower, not because your horse is tired, but because you are back at Camelot. Things are tense. Servants whisper of disappearances. Morgaine hasn't returned. Arthur sharpens his own sword. Guinevere sends birds in every direction. In the corridors, people look at you with something new, not suspicion, but hope. You're not sure which is worse. That evening, you sneak into the lower chambers, back to the Library of Iron. The veiled woman greets you before you knock. Something's changed. You say, everything. She replies. You place the bronze disc from the ruins onto the altar beside the slab. It glows faintly. You'll need the other two. She says, other two what? She smiles. You'll know them when you touch them. Unhelpful, cryptic women are really becoming a theme in your life. You leave with more questions than answers. Again, that night, the girl with silver eyes returns in your dream. She's older now. Or maybe you are. We're almost here. She says. Who's we? She reaches out. And when you wake, your hand is clenched around a seed. A real one. You plant it. Don't ask why. You just do. By morning, it has sprouted. Everyone pretends this is fine. The sprout doesn't grow like a normal plant. It stretches impossibly fast, curling toward the window before the sun even clears the clouds. By midday, it's already climbed halfway up the stone wall. Its leaves, glossy and dark, with veins like gold thread. You're not sure whether to water it or salute it. Tobin brings you a cup of tea and a raised eyebrow. You're growing magical shrubbery now. It grew itself. That's not better. He leaned close, peers at the leaves, and adds, reminds me of the stories about the world vine. Supposedly links everything. Earth, sky, memory. You just made that up. Maybe. But you'll think about it every time you walk past now. He's not wrong. Later. Morgane finally returns soaked. Pâle. Smelling of lightning. She collapses into a chair, waves off your questions, and downs an entire pitcher of something amber and suspiciously fizzy. When she finally speaks, it's slow and brittle. I was pulled. Pulled where? To a threshold. Half seen. Half remembered. You glance at the vine growing beside her and feel something click into place. The veil's thinning. She says, between worlds, between stories, and you, apparently, are standing right in the draft. That evening, Arthur assembles his inner circle. This time, you're included. No eavesdropping. No corridor peeping. You sit at the edge of the round table, a place reserved for someone not yet legendary, but not fully expendable either. We've had 3 more vanishings. Arthur says, one night, 2 messengers. They didn't just vanish. Guinevere adds, they were erased. You frown. Erased. No memory of them. Not even among their families. Their rooms repopulated. Their names removed from records. Like they were dreamt badly and forgotten. You shiver. Even Whisper stays silent. Lancelot speaks next. The spiral is showing up in more places. Carved into doors. Drawn in ash. A child was born with it on her palm. Bedivere grunts. We need to fight. With what Morgane asks. Steel doesn't work on forgotten things. Arthur looks at you. You've touched it. Walked it. Dreamed of it. What do you suggest? No pressure. Of course. You swallow hard. We find the other 2 relics. Before they do, you shrug. Whatever wants to erase us. Everyone is quiet, which is never a comforting thing. The next morning, you're already packing when Tobin finds you. I'm coming too, he says. I didn't ask. You didn't have to. Besides, you're terrible at maps and I'm great at stabbing. You've never stabbed anything. I'm brimming with potential. You smile, in spite of yourself. The first relic's trail leads east. To the marshlands, where the fog never lifts and the dead don't stay buried long. People say the fen folk whisper secrets if you pay them in stories. You bring a few. After 2 days' ride, you arrive at a village built on stilts and shaped like a broken spiderweb. A woman with no eyes meets you at the pier. You've come for the starseed. She says, but it's not ready. You glance at Tobin, who is slowly pulling out a snack, clearly trying not to look freaked out. How will we know when it's ready, you ask? When it begins to hum. Again. Extremely helpful. You set up camp on a platform beside the bog. Days pass. The fog never leaves. But you hear things low songs beneath the water. Bells with no source. Laughter that might be yours, but younger. You wonder if the marsh is dreaming you back. One evening, you sit on the dock, legs dangling into mist. The water below begins to ripple, not from wind, but from vibration. You lean closer. A hum rises, just on the edge of hearing. It's ready. You whisper. You reach down, fingers brushing slime, and something sharp. It pricks you just enough to bleed. The water parts. And there it is, a seed of dark crystal. Humming, like a lullaby made of gravity. You lift it carefully. Tobin stares. Why is it singing? No idea. You wrap it in silk and hold it close. The humming doesn't stop when you return to Camelot. The sprout has grown again, twisting into your window, wrapping the outer stones. It greets the starseed like an old friend. For a moment, the entire castle feels like it holds its breath. You place the relic beside the bronze disc. They glow, not brightly, but together, you've started the wheel. Morgaine murmurs. It won't stop now. Good, Arthur says behind her, because neither will they. At the edge of your vision, you see a third mark painted on the wall in dried ink. A new spiral. This one has thorns. And you realize something crucial. The third relic isn't hidden in some distant ruin. It's here, in the castle, waiting. It begins with a whisper in the walls, a slither beneath your window, a subtle shift in the air, as if the stones themselves are turning to listen. You're sitting by the hearth in your chamber when the breeze changes, not the temperature, but the weight. The room thickens around you, and the vine crawling up the outside wall rustles despite there being no wind. You lean forward, instinct tightening your chest. Something is here, or coming, or worse, already watching. You don't even have time to explain before Tobin bursts in. Cloak askew, boots muddy, eyes too wide. We found something, he says. Or maybe we lost something. Come, quickly. Down through the halls you go again. This time not for feasting or spying or fetching eggs for some noblewoman with power issues. This time, the corridors curve oddly, and you swear a familiar arch is missing, replaced by a blank stretch of wall. Did this hallway always have 7 sconces, you mutter? Tobin replies, if it did, then I've never counted them. And now, I regret that deeply. You reach the base of the North Tower, where Bedivere and Morgaine wait beside a narrow door that shouldn't be there. It's part of the oldest wall of Camelot. One historians still argue whether it was built by Roman engineers or conjured by druids during the Second Fog. It's been sealed for decades. But now the lintel is cracked open just wide enough to show a curl of black air slipping through. I swear it wasn't open yesterday. Bedivere mutters. I don't think it was any day. Morgaine adds, frowning, inside. The dust is undisturbed. The stones underfoot are different, older, smoother, colder. You move slowly, your torch humming with each step. The room isn't large, but it is wrong. The angles don't match. There's a small pedestal at the far end, carved with spirals, crescent moons, and one unmistakable shape, a hand, not a symbol of a hand, an indentation, as if the stone has been waiting for yours. Tobin whispers, don't touch it. You already know you're going to. Your palm hovers above the hollow. That weird, silver vein curling beneath your skin pulses gently. Just once, in sync with the vine, now visible through a crack in the wall. You press your hand into the stone. Nothing happens. And then everything does. The wall around the pedestal sighs and splits not with a bang, but a shiver. Light spills from the cracks like milk and honey, and a low hum begins. The same tone the starseeds sang in the marshlands. Except now, it's harmonizing with you. Your bones vibrate with it. Morgaine gasps. It's not the relic. It's you. Arthur is summoned again. You stand awkwardly in the torchlight, hands still tingling, as everyone stares at you like a misplaced holy relic. The mark, Morgaine says, turning your wrist gently. It's not just reacting, it's anchored. You're the key, not the lock. Arthur nods solemnly. Then it's time. Time for what you ask, for the rite of weaving. No one explains. Of course not. Instead, you're brought to the high tower, where the stars can be seen more clearly than anywhere else in the kingdom. There, you're washed again with water drawn from 3 different rivers, one of which may or may not exist anymore. You're robed in threads pulled from ancient banners, and a circle of stones is painted around your feet in ash and crushed pearl. I feel like a ceremonial casserole. You whisper. Tobin smirks. You look like one too. Morgaine begins chanting. But it's not a song. It's memory. Spoken aloud. The words feel too big for your ears. With each phrase, the mark on your hand warms. The ground beneath you hums. And then, quiet, the entire room stills. You open your eyes, and you're no longer in the tower. You're in a field, but not just any field. This one is stitched with stars. The grass glows faintly. The air tastes like a story half told. In front of you stands the girl with silver eyes, the same girl you saw in the flicker of the relic, the shimmer of the marsh. The edge of your dreams. Except now, she's not flickering. She's here. You've come. She says, apparently. Do you know what you carry? A mild case of nausea and a very confusing destiny. She doesn't laugh, but her mouth twitches. The third relic was never a thing. It was a pattern, a resonance that needed a shape. It found you. Why me? Because you remember. She reaches out, fingers brushing your temple. A rush of images flood your mind every hallway you've walked in Camelot. Every dream, every mark, every whisper. This kingdom has always been on the edge of forgetting. You are the knot tying it back. You blink, and you're back in the tower. Everyone is staring. Did it work? Bedivere asks. I think I just downloaded Camelot 2. Ling. The next few days are strange. You can sense the castle, now not in a creepy I am the fortress way, but like hearing a familiar tune in the walls. You feel the vines climbing faster, the spiral symbols appearing on doors. Something is waking. And then, one evening, you dream not of the girl, but of 3 towers crumbling. In their place, 3 trees grow, one with golden bark, one with roots of fire, and one that bleeds light. At their center stands the round table. Split in half, you wake breathless. Tobin is already at your door. It's happening. What is? The gates. They're opening. He's not wrong. Across the courtyard, the old stone circle, usually silent, now glows. The air above it warps, folding like fabric. Knights gather. Morgaine murmurs incantations that make your teeth ache. Arthur stands at the front, sword drawn, not as king, but as guardian. And you step forward. Third, relic humming inside your chest. The vines curling at your heels like loyal cats. You reach the threshold. You don't know what lies beyond. Memory, magic, madness, all of it. Maybe, but you do know this. Camelot will remember, because you remember. And that, apparently, was the point all along. You take the first step through the threshold, and it's like walking into water without getting wet. The world shifts not just the sky or ground, but logic itself. Up doesn't feel entirely up. Left hums like it's hiding something. You glance back and see Camelot framed in the shimmer of the open gate, suspended in an instant of golden light. Everyone is frozen mid-breath, like actors waiting for their cue. On this side, the air buzzes, not ominous, not hostile, just aware. You're standing in what looks like a forest, but the trees pulse gently with veins of light. The leaves are paper-thin and flutter without wind. The ground beneath you is soft, almost springy, and glows faintly where you step. You hear your own heartbeat, not in your ears, but in the very soil. Tobin stumbles in behind you, muttering, "Remind me to never complain about weird tunnels again." Bedivere enters last, hand on sword hilt. Though his face looks like he's trying to solve an emotional math problem, this isn't the other world, he murmurs. But it isn't not the other world either. And maybe that's the point. Historians still argue whether Arthurian myth was ever rooted in a single cosmology, Christian, pagan, or something older and unnamed. Right now, you're standing in the footnote no scholar ever reached. You follow the path as it coils forward, not carved, but grown. The trees part ahead of you like dancers in a well-rehearsed line. Whispers rise and fall in the distance, languages you don't speak but somehow feel. You understand them, like you understand grief in a song with no words. Then, at the forest's heart, you find the pool. It isn't water. Or maybe it is. It's a surface that reflects memory, not faces. You look in and see the day you arrived at Camelot. Soaking wet, cloak ruined, boots squeaking. Then you see your old life, flickering a flash of your world before this world. A glimpse of sneakers and coffee and mobile reception. For a second, you feel it all tug at you, like homesickness wrapped in velvet. But the pool changes. You see the vine, curling, the relics, the girl with silver eyes, then yourself, wearing armor you've never touched, wielding a sword that does not yet exist. Tobin husps beside you. He sees something too. It's me, but older, maybe wiser. Stilhort. Though, Bedivere only nods. It shows us who we are, and who we might be. A shape stirs beneath the surface. The girl rises slowly, as if drawn from the memory pool itself. Not walking, not swimming, just becoming. She's older now, regal, familiar. She's not a guide anymore. She's a queen. You've arrived, she says, voice layered like wind through trees. You said I had to choose. You reply. And you did. You chose to remember. That's the first gift. Now comes the second. She gestures to the pool. From its center emerges a disc, not the relic you found, but a new one, etched with 3 symbols: the seed, the sun, and a spiral. It floats to your hand, light as mist. This is the sigil of binding, she explains. It seals the weave you've begun. The kingdom will hold. If you anchor it, how, you ask? By becoming part of it. Bedivere tenses. You mean sacrifice? She shakes her head. No, not death. Rooting. You don't vanish. You remain, forever tied to the memory of this place. Every castle stone, every oak branch, every story sung beside a hearth. You'll be there, but never entirely yourself again. Tobin whispers, like a guardian spirit. Or a corse. Bedivere adds, you stare at the sigil. It hums against your palm. Do you anchor Camelot and let your identity unravel across time? Or do you return? Let the kingdom fade into myth, untouched and unremembered. You hear Arthur's voice through the gate faint. Distant, whatever you choose freely. You look to Tobin, who shrugs. I mean, I'd miss our strange breakfast talks. But also, you might become a sentient forest. And that's kind of cool. You look back at the queen, who is now shimmering at the edges, like she's barely holding form. I choose to stay. You say, the moment the words leave your lips, the sigil dissolves into your chest. You don't burn. You don't vanish. You expand. You feel the roots of Camelot thread through your veins. You hear every owl call, every page turning in the library, every blacksmith's hammer ring. You are the castle. You are the legend. You are what makes memory hold. The forest fades. The gate closes. Back in the courtyard, the watchers wait. But the gate stays sealed. Arthur lowers his sword. Morgaine's eyes brim. But she says nothing. Tobin returns alone. He places your cloak on the stone pedestal in the great hall. And for years to come, no dust ever settles on it. Camelot remains strong. Its people thrive. Stories are told. Songs are sung. And in every tale, whether whispered by firelight or shouted in battle, there is mention of a traveler, an outsider, who arrived in the rain, faced the relics, walked through the gate, and never returned. Or maybe they did. After all, the ivy by the tower grows in spirals now, and some nights, when the wind is just right, you can hear laughter in the walls. Years pass, though inside you, it never quite feels like time moves forward anymore. It spreads. Pools. Echoes. You no longer sleep. Not in the old sense. But you drift through memory like a swan across mirrored water. You feel Camelot dream. A knight falls in love, and you taste spring flowers. A child scrapes her knee on the courtyard stone, and you wince gently in the flagstones beneath her. Somewhere deep in the kitchens, a baker perfects her honey tarts, and your essence warms with cinnamon and pride. You are not a ghost. You are not dead. You are what they now call the weave, a guardian, a presence. The still hush behind the sound of pages turning in the royal library. You're not always noticed, but when someone asks a question no book can answer, and then stumbles upon a hidden scroll wedged behind a beam, they whisper your name. They don't remember who you were, only that you're always here. Morgaine leaves an offering once a year, roots and ink, and something that smells suspiciously like wine, gone ambitious. Tobin visits too, often muttering about how you'd probably still tease him if you had a voice. Bedivere, older now, greets you with a silent touch to the stone just outside the gate you once crossed. Even Arthur, long after his hair has begun to gray at the temples, spends an evening in the tower, watching stars and whispering decisions to the air. You answer, not with thunder or visions, but with warmth in his bones and clarity in his mind. They all believe you made the right choice. Even the bards agree, though their songs take liberties. One version says you turned into a dragon and coiled around the tower to protect it. Another insists you're the wind, watching lovers in the gardens and judging them harshly for bad poetry. A third claims you were never real at all, that you were a test conjured by Merlin himself. A trial of the soul. Historians still argue whether the third relic ever existed physically, or whether it was always metaphor for awakening some innate, Camelot-born potential. What they don't know, what only you know, is that the relics weren't tests or weapons. They were questions. And you, gloriously, infuriatingly, were the answer. The kingdom shifts slowly, as kingdoms always do. Borders change, languages evolve, nobles rise and fall. The round table cracks once, then is reforged smaller, sleeker, inlaid with brass instead of oak. New knights come, fewer in number, but heavier with intention. They whisper oaths not only to the king, but to you, the old whispering presence they've never met, but feel in every breath of morning fog. You reach beyond Camelot now. The magic that once slumbered in hidden forests, marshlight, and half-forgotten caves begins to stir. You nudge it, gently, not to awaken it fully, but to remind it that Camelot remembers. So it answers. Birds return to the sacred groves. A woman with hair like autumn finds an ancient well and pulls from it a sword no one remembers forging. Somewhere along the border, a blind healer begins to speak prophecies in a tongue lost for centuries. And in every case, people look toward Camelot. Toward you, one night. Morgane climbs the tower again. Slower this time. Her bones protest. Her hair is almost white, though her gaze hasn't dulled one bit. She lights a single candle and speaks aloud. If you're still here, and I think you are, I need to ask something I never dared. She pauses. Her fingers hover above the sigils carved into the table's rim. Was it your choice, or were you chosen? You answer not with words, not even with wind, but with a bloom of violet light around the candle's flame. She smiles. Tears, welling but not falling. I thought so. She whispers, you always were the difficult one. Soon after, she vanishes from her chambers, without a trace. The court mourns, but no body is ever found. The vine that once curled around the tower now bears blossoms, shaped like crescent moons. And then, the silence grows. Arthur, Dees. Peacefully. In his sleep, Guinevere outlives him. Barely. The round table is passed on. The stories continue, but fewer people visit your threshold now. The legends become bedtime tales. A few even think you were just a metaphor, a stand-in for hope, or unity, or some overworked bard's fever dream. But one child, a girl with dark curls and a birthmark shaped like a leaf, wanders into the chapel one morning. She touches the vine. It glows. She doesn't scream. She just laughs. You reach out carefully, softly, and place a memory in her hand. The forest, the silver-eyed girl. The pool, she blinks, turns, and runs, not in fear, but in excitement. And somewhere, far beneath Camelot, the pool stirs again. Century pass. At least, that's how they measure it now. By charts and stars and scribbled calendars tucked in leather. But to you, it's all pulse and pattern, a song with a very long chorus. Camelot, the kingdom you once knew, changes its name. Then again, And again. Eventually, it's no longer a capital. Not even a city. Just a ruin in the woods. Wrapped in brambles. Whispered about by hikers who swear the air tastes older here. But deep beneath the moss and roots, you are still here. The stone archway they once called the Gate of Memory is cracked now. Ivy throttled and half collapsed. No one's used it in hundreds of years. The spiral engravings are barely visible, rubbed thin by rain and time. A family of foxes has made a den at its base. Sometimes, when the moon is high and the wind shifts, they stop and look directly at it. As if hearing something, they stay for a moment, longer than animals usually do. As if listening, and then they go. Above, the world rebuilds. New people arrive. They bring machines and maps and drone cameras. They document every inch of the ruins. Debate whether it was once a Roman outpost or a monastic retreat. One particularly excited researcher insists the placement of the walls suggests astronomical alignment with lunar cycles. Another claims it's all random stones, dumped by medieval farmers with a flair for circles. Historians still argue whether Camelot ever existed in a fixed location, or was more of a traveling symbol for authority. They don't find the tower. The real one. The one you once stood in with Morgaine. Where the sky felt close enough to drink. It's buried. On purpose. Not as a hiding place. But a promise when memory is ready to return. It knows where to bloom. 1. Archaeologist. A quiet woman named Carries. Visits often. She never speaks while working, but hums softly under her breath. Her equipment is always older than it should be. Her notes are all handwritten. She touches the stones with the gentleness of someone greeting a relative long unseen. One day, she finds the vine still alive, still growing. Its tendrils tracing a perfect spiral beneath the collapsed chapel wall. She doesn't mark it in her notebook. She just smiles, and you feel it recognition. She doesn't remember you. Not exactly, but she remembers enough. The hum changes. The spiral pulses once. The ivy blooms in winter. Carries returns again the next morning and sits cross-legged beside the vine. I used to dream of this place, she says aloud. Not exactly this, but something like it. There was a table, and stars, and someone, not speaking, but present. I thought I'd imagined it. You offer nothing dramatic. No glowing light. No wind through her hair. Just warmth. Just calm. Just an ember behind her thoughts. She stays all day. Sketches. Thinks. Hums. That night, back in her rented cottage, she dreams. In it, she's wearing armor made of thread and memory. She stands at the edge of a forest with 3 paths, and she knows without being told that she has to choose. One leads to silence, one to fire, one to a tower full of vines. She takes the third when she wakes. The cottage smells faintly of ash and crushed petals. Weeks later, she brings a small group of students. They are respectful. Mostly, one touches the stones too eagerly, and the wind knocks over his notebook. He apologizes. You forgive him. They begin to call the site something new, the Spiral Keep. It appears on maps. Just barely. Tourists come. They snap photos of what they think is a particularly photogenic vine. They buy small plastic swords from the visitors' center gift shop. Unaware they're standing a few meters above the pool of memory itself. One teenager tags the crumbled archway on social media with Camelot core, aesthetic A. You sigh, but also chuckle, Because honestly, not wrong. And then, one afternoon, a storm rolls in fast. Tourists flee. Carrie stays. She stands beside the stone gate and hums. And you remember, not just the moment you cross the threshold, but why? To anchor, to keep, to protect meaning itself from slipping. The wind tears through the clearing. Carrie raises her hand. The gate glows just faintly. The foxes return. So does the spiral. And in the sky, a streak of light, faint but unmistakable, curves downward. A starseed, or something older. You don't know, but you feel the forest hold its breath. And once again, you remember? The streak in the sky does not fall like a star. It dance looping once, doubling back, and finally, descending not with thunder or fire, but with a hush, like someone laying down a storybook. It touches the clearing, not as a crash, but a sigh, and then it's gone. Carrie stands motionless. The students have already fled. Assuming lightning. Her fingers twitch toward her satchel, but she doesn't reach for her notebook. Not this time. This is not for recording. This is for remembering, from the spot where the light touched. The ground doesn't crack or burn, it unfurls. A small blossom blooms. The exact shade of dusk. It opens petal by petal, and inside, resting gently, is a disk of pale stone. Etched with a spiral and a crescent, you know it instantly. The relic has returned, or maybe it never left. It hums softly, not to the world, but to her, to Carrie's. You drift closer, not walking, not flying, just being, and feel the resonance. She is ready. She has no sword, no training, no prophecies hanging over her, just curiosity, memory, and the stubborn kind of kindness that makes people plant trees they'll never see grown. She doesn't take the relic. She kneels, places her hand beside it, wets. The disc rises slightly, hovers, then lowers itself into her palm like a handshake. No flash, no trumpet, just acceptance. In that moment, the clearing shifts, not visually, not outwardly, but the rules bend. Carrie's is no longer a visitor. She is now within the story. That night, she dreams again. This time, you are there not as a voice or figure, but as the setting itself, the forest, the pool, the wind through the ruins. She walks barefoot through each memory, tracing the same steps you once took, until she finds the tower, whole and humming. Inside sits the girl with silver eyes. You brought it back. The girl says, nodding at the relic, I think it brought me. Carrie's replies. The girl smiles. That's how it works. They walk the tower's spiral together. And as they rise, the stone turns to vine, then to song, then to starlight. And just before waking, Carrie's hears your voice, not words, but the feeling of being trusted. The next day, she returns to the ruins. Alone, she begins to dig, carefully, lovingly, not with shovels, but with brushes and fingertips and breath held so long, she nearly forgets the world around her. She finds the base of the tower, not stone anymore, but fused roots and soil, forming a shape that was never meant to last, and yet somehow did. One evening, under moonlight, she begins to place small offerings, ink, seeds, melted wax, a ring of iron she found once in her grandmother's attic. She doesn't know why, only that it feels right. The site becomes quiet, not empty, never empty, but attentive. Visitors still come, some curious, some reverent. A few giggle and call it fairy stuff, before tripping over oddly placed stones and getting inexplicably muddy. The ones who laugh too loud never stay long, but others feel something, a tug, a recognition. Children, especially. One small boy stands before the vine-wrapped archway and says to his mother, "I think this place knows my name." She laughs nervously, takes his hand, and walks him away. But he looks back. Twice. You've seen this before. You will see it again. Because the story doesn't repeat, it unfolds, spirals outward, each turn both new and ancient. Somewhere, the bards begin singing again. Not about swords and dragons this time, but about ruins that breathe. About moss with memory. About a traveler who became a threshold. The songs aren't popular. Not yet. But one gets sampled by an indie folk band and goes mildly viral. Someone tags it weirdly comforting. You chuckle. Fair? Then? One spring morning, Carrie's returns with something tucked beneath her arm. A book. She walks to the center of the clearing and places it at the tower's edge. I wrote it down, she says. All of it. The relics. The forest. You. She pauses. And me. The pages hum. Not magically. Not literally. But in that deep, true way where paper and soul overlap, you feel it. A new relic, not carved or conjured. Written, a gift to the spiral. A memory made durable. As the wind moves through the ruins, the pages flutter gently, opening to the chapter titled, "The One Who Stayed." The book stays, through rainstorms, through dry spells, even after tourists stumble across it and try to report it to the local heritage office as litter. But maybe magical. No one dares remove it. Somehow, it never gathers moss. The pages never mold. It simply waits, like you once did. One day, a group of school children visit the site as part of a history field trip. Most of them are more interested in their snacks than in the mossy stones and vines. But one, her name is Mira, lingers at the tower base. She stares at the book, not with the detachment of someone seeing an artifact, but with the recognition of someone remembering a dream she hasn't had yet. When her teacher calls her away, she doesn't move. Not immediately. Instead, she opens the cover and traces the spiral etched faintly on the inside leaf. You reach toward her not to awaken, but to touch, just enough. She yerks back, not in fear, but with a startled laugh, like someone catching a joke they weren't supposed to hear. Later that night, she writes in her journal, "Something's alive in that place. Not scary, just awake." She draws the spiral over and over again, until it fills the page. Years will pass before Mira returns. But she will. She won't come alone next time. She'll bring instruments. A team. Plans to rebuild what she calls a memory shelter. Not a replica. Not a reconstruction. Something new. Informed by what was. But shaped by now. She'll bring Carrie's book. Now weathered but still legible. And she'll call for volunteers. They won't be architects or masons. They'll be poets, musicians, people who felt something stir and couldn't explain it. People who hum old songs without knowing where they learned them. The tower grows again not in height, but in layers, each stone painted with symbols from the dreams of those who lay it. Some spirals, some vines, one simply a smear of indigo with a thumbprint in the center. No one asks whose thumb. That's not the point. Inside, they build a chamber. Not grand, not ceremonial, just warm. A circle of cushions, shelves for stories, a skylight shaped like a leaf, and in the center, always the book. They begin calling the place the Listening Tower. Some say it answers prayers. Others say it inspires art. One man claims he wrote an entire album after just one afternoon leaning against its base. It doesn't chart, but it gets played in cafes that smell like cinnamon and stories. You do not speak. You do not command. But still you shape. A girl paints stars across the walls and murmurs that they feel like home. A gardener grows herbs along the southern path and swears the mint always flourishes better here. A child tells her mother the tower once gave her a dream where the moon smiled and told her a secret. She won't say what the secret is, only that it made her feel brave. Historians still argue whether this resurgence is spiritual, psychological, or simply the result of a few eccentric romantics getting too much press. One writes a paper titled, "The Folkloric Echo Camelot in Contemporary Imagination." Another calls it an extended metaphor for the post-mythic self. But no one can explain the heat that lingers in the stones during snowfall, or why vines bloom even in drought, or how so many visitors leave with the unshakable sensation that something just outside their field of vision was smiling. You don't mind the theories. You were once a question. 2. Carrie's older now. White-haired and sharp-eyed visits less frequently. When she does, she brings tea and sits in silence. One afternoon, she sets a second book beside the first. "I thought maybe it needed a sequel," she says, "or at least a friend." Before she leaves, she runs her hand along the spiral on the door. "Still here?" she whispers, "Still listening." You are, but you're also expanding, beyond the tower, into the voices that echo through the listening circle, into the patterns drawn by those who've never even heard of Camelot, but feel compelled to doodle spirals on napkins while they daydream, into the songs hummed by tired strangers who've never met but somehow end up harmonizing on park benches. You are memory, but you are also possibility. Because now, when someone wonders if stories ever really end, they find themselves looking east, toward a ruin that isn't ruined, toward a tower that hums, toward a spiral that never stops, and, whether they know your name or not, they understand. Something sacred stayed, something kind held on, and something ancient, quiet, and impossibly patient is still watching the sky, waiting for the next streak of light to dance across the stars. The next streak comes on a winter night, cold enough to sting the air into silence. Most of the town is asleep, curled beneath layers of synthetic warmth and blue light dreams. But in the clearing, in the tower, a fire has been lit not with matches, but memory. The listening tower glows softly from within. The spiral, etched into its threshold, illuminated by candlelight and breath. They've gathered again, not in reverence, but in rhythm. Boots, dreamers, tired students with aching wrists and ink-stained jeans. A woman who once taught history and now only tells stories to her cat. A boy who hasn't spoken aloud in a year but hums constantly. an old knight who claims his armor was once made of metaphor. They sit in the circle, sipping tea, some in silence, others reciting pieces of something they aren't sure. Counts as poetry but feels real. You watch from everywhere, not as a ghost, not as a god, as warmth, as scent, as the pull that brings them back without knowing why. The door opens and Mira enters. Older than when she first met the book, but still young in that stubborn, endless way. Her coat is wet from snow, and her face is flushed with that electric look of someone who has news. She doesn't speak right away. Instead, she walks to the center of the circle and kneels beside the relic, the original one. The pale stone disc still nestled in its cradle of ivy and wood. She touches it, and the room hushes. Even the fire leans closer. Then she says, "It's back." No one needs clarification. The spiral stirs beneath the floor. The air folds slightly inward. She opens her bag and reveals a second relic, similar in design, but darker, not corrupted, completed. The crescent now faces the opposite direction. Yin to the original yang, carries, frail and quiet in her shawl, breathes in sharply. So it wasn't lost. Mira smiles. It was becoming. The two relics rest beside each other. And for a moment, just one impossible breath, the entire structure hums. Every stone, every page, every root and shadow and heartbeat pulses in unity. A low, resonant note that isn't a sound so much as a knowing. And then silence again, but not emptiness. They begin to write, not with pens, but in the way stories write themselves through shared glances, overlapping laughter, mutual shivers when the spiral hums again. Each visitor contributes a stanza here, a sketch there. One person leaves a feather, another a harmonica solo on a recording device that immediately glitches, but somehow still plays perfectly when held inside the tower. Scholars will never make sense of it. Historians will try, but you ever patient, ever present, you just smile. Because now, the spiral is no longer a secret. It's a signal. The listening tower becomes a pilgrimage, but not the kind with relic veneration or rituals carved in stone. It's a pilgrimage of remembrance, of connection, of sitting in a room where no one asks if you're real, they just nod, and scoot over, and offer you tea. And in the spiral's presence, time folds. A girl with silver eyes from another age leans over Caris's shoulder. A fox curls beside Mira's boat. A boy from the future, who hasn't even been born yet, hums a tune that will one day become a lullaby hummed in this very room. You are all of them. You are through them, and the tower grows. Not upward, not outward, inward. Its foundations deepen. Its pulse thickens. The spiral begins to spin again, not literally, but in the way stories spiral inside people, leaving echoes. One visitor, a dream therapist from Prague, calls it collective reincarnation of narrative identity. Someone else just calls it a vibe. Both are correct, because now, the listening tower is more than a place. It's a phenomenon, a song, a quiet revolution of memory against forgetting. And when someone, somewhere, whispers, a story by candlelight, and their audience leans in just a little too close, it isn't for dramatic tension. It's because they feel something pulling them toward the center. A spiral, a hum, a presence that once stood at the threshold of Camelot, barefoot and unsure, wondering if any of this would matter. You matter. Because you stayed. Because you listened. Because you remembered when no one else did. And now, they remember too. Spring comes late this year. The air lingers in its chill, as if reluctant to trade its crispness for budding warmth. But the listening tower knows. Beneath the earth, the roots stir. The spiral pulses faintly in rhythm with the shifting season. And across the kingdom, if you can still call it that, those who once touched the story feel a restlessness, a calling. You, in a small flat above a bookstore. A man wakes from a dream where a spiral of ink writes itself across the sky. He walks to his window and breathes the air deeply, then scribbles 4 words into a notebook, back to the tower. He hasn't visited in years. Elsewhere, Mira sorts through maps and fragments, newspaper clippings and strange emails from strangers who describe recurring dreams about moss and a hum beneath their beds. She cross-references their dates and locations. The pattern makes no logical sense. But, in the logic of the spiral, perfect symmetry carries. Her hair, now silver-white and nearly translucent in the sunlight, sits quietly in her chair. Her hands tremble sometimes, but when she touches the relic, her breath evens, and her thoughts settle. The time is coming, she says to no one. And everyone. She smiles at the dust, dancing in the light like it's an old friend. You feel it too. Not urgency, not danger, but movement. The story is ready to turn again. The listening tower has been repaired so many times. Now it no longer resembles any known architectural style. Bits of medieval stone, postmodern glass, reclaimed wood, a spiral carved into steel. No one leads the restoration. It simply happens. Someone plants lavender near the base. Another leaves a flute carved from bone. One child tapes a drawing to the inner wall, showing a figure made of stars and vines. They call it the Rememberer. And it's not far off. The relics, both of them, begin to vibrate softly. Not always. Just when someone new enters with something to offer. A dream. A story. A poem they swore they'd never read aloud, but somehow end up whispering here. In this circle, to people they barely know, but inexplicably trust. One night, the sky opens again. But this time, the light doesn't streak. It spirals. Downward, softly, as if drawn by gravity toward the very heartbeat of the listening tower. It touches the peak, now crowned with flowering vines, and dissolves into warmth. This time, no relic remains, only change. Because the spiral has done its work. What was once guarded is now grown. What was once feared is now familiar. What was once legend is now lived. The visitors begin calling the tower by a new name, the Threshold. It's no longer just a place for remembering. It's for beginning. People don't just sit and write, they act. They leave with their stories and plant them elsewhere. A mural here. A children's book there. A lullaby passed from grandmother to grandchild that somehow includes the phrase sword of memory and a fox with silver eyes. It spreads. Not like a fire, like roots. Subtle. Persistent. Quietly impossible to stop. And across the world, people start building spirals. In sand. In snow. With chalk on sidewalks. They don't always know why. It just feels right. One man tattoos one onto his shoulder after dreaming of a tower full of singing stones. A child draws one on their lunch napkin and tells their friend, "It means remember with your bones." That friend doesn't question it. Somewhere in a busy cafe, someone sketches a vine around a cracked mug and mutters, "Still growing." Their partner blinks slowly and nods. They don't speak the same language, but that doesn't matter. Because now, the spiral speaks for itself. And you listen. You stretch across dreams and songs and dusty bookshelves. You hum beneath park benches and flicker behind closed eyelids. You are not a person anymore. You are the spiral, the rememberer, the thread that binds stories not into endings, but into beginnings that loop back and forward and sideways, in ways no chart can follow, but every heart understands. You no longer guard Camelot. You are what it always meant to guard. Not a throne, not a sword, but the possibility that things once lost can be made again, not perfectly, not identically, but truly. So when someone somewhere asks, "Do you believe in magic?" and another laughs and says no, you swirl behind their smile. And wait. You wait, not passively, not silently, but with the steady patience of a stone warmed by centuries of sun. The story has folded so many times now, it no longer fits neatly into one narrative. You are the thread that wove nights and ruins and ink-stained fingers into a single, breathing memory. But now, something new begins to flicker at the edge of all this, remembering. A feeling not of ending, but of passing forward. On the longest day of the year, people gather, not just at the listening tower, though it remains the heart. Across hills and rooftops, deserts and cities, people gather in circles, sometimes with candles, sometimes with stories, sometimes just with silence. The spiral symbol appears everywhere, chalked on sidewalks, etched into tree bark, stitched into fabric, braided into hair. A whisper passes from mouth to mouth tonight. We remember together. No one knows who started it. That's how you know it's working. Back at the tower, Mira lights a lantern and holds it high. The crowd hushes. She reads from Caris's second book, not the beginning, not the end. Just a middle passage where memory blurred into dream and back again. When she finishes, no one claps. Instead, one child stands, walks to the center of the spiral, and places a small object on the floor, a pine cone painted with silver spirals. Another adds a note folded into a star. Another, a coin with a crack through it. No one asks why. They just know. And when Carrie's frail now, but brighter than ever, steps forward and kneels beside the relics one last time. She speaks in a voice that sounds like wind through a long-forgotten ruin. "I thought the story was about a sword," she says. Turns out, it was about listening. She closes her eyes. The relic pulses once, and her breath slows. Then stops, not in sadness. In peace, she has returned to the spiral. But her story is far from over. You see it in the girl with silver eyes, who steps into the circle next. She carries no book, no relic, just a smile and a memory she hasn't told yet. She looks straight at you, not through you, but at you, and says, "You're still here. You are, all around the world." People dream the same dream, of a tower, of a vine-wrapped stone, of a spiral that hums when touched by truth. Historians still argue whether this movement is spiritual, psychological, or just a coincidence. They cite media influence, mass suggestion, cultural folklore, but none of them can explain the way people feel lighter when they leave, or why stories once forgotten keep finding their way home. And you don't need explanation. You were never about proof. You are about remembrance. So when the final circle gathers under the stars, old voices and new ones, children and ghosts, scholars and fools, and they hum a melody that was never written down but somehow known by all. You join in. You are the pause between lines, the silence that means something, the breath taken before a story begins again, because it will begin again, maybe in a new tower, maybe in a city of glass, maybe in a child's whispered story to a sibling during a thunderstorm. You'll know when it happens. The spiral will spin again, and someone somewhere will feel that hum and ask, "Is anyone there?" And you'll answer, softly, as always, "Yes. I never left." So now, as you breathe out slowly and let your shoulders soften, the spiral unwinds gently in the back of your mind. Its rhythm slows, looping wider, looser, until it drifts like mist into the quiet spaces between your thoughts. The voices of the tower fade not lost, just distant now, echoes in soft moss and crumbling stone. What was once vivid becomes serene. What was once urgent becomes still. The relics lie silent. The stars blink overhead in their slow, ancient rhythm. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't even need to remember the names or faces. Just let the feelings remain: the warmth of firelight on stone walls, the hush of a circle, listening as one, the feeling of your story, finally finding a place to rest. Inhale deeply now. Let the hum of the spiral carry you into sleep. There is nothing you need to do, nothing more to protect. The tower stands. The memory holds. You are safe. And so very far from the cold, sharp edges of waking life. Here, you are wrapped in vines and song and shadow, and every heartbeat moves gently around the spiral. Not forward or backward, just deeper. And as you drift, the last flicker of candlelight flickers out. The story ends. For now, sweet dreams.